Something strange is happening, and the NFL might not want fans connecting the dots yet. One quarterback struggles in Cleveland. A coach leaves. Suddenly, a different quarterback in a different city starts hearing the same whispers, the same doubts, the same early replacement talk before a single real evaluation even happens. Coincidence? Maybe. But when timelines start matching almost perfectly, people begin asking uncomfortable questions. Because what if the rookie season everyone argued about wasn't just about talent? What if it was about fit, trust, and decisions made long before the first snap was ever played? Now insiders, analysts, and even rival executives are noticing patterns that look eerily familiar. And if those patterns are real, it completely changes how we view what happened, not just in Cleveland, but what might already be unfolding in Atlanta right now. So before you decide who failed who, you need to see the full timeline. When Kevin Stefanski left Cleveland, most people assumed the story was over. New coach, new direction, clean break. But almost immediately, the conversation didn't calm down, it intensified. Because instead of fading into the background, the debate around Shedeur Sanders actually grew louder after the separation. And that rarely happens in the NFL. Normally, when a player and coach part ways, the narrative settles. Fans move on. Analysts shift topics. Here, the opposite happened. Former players began hinting the situation wasn't as simple as wins and losses. Commentators started revisiting game tape, and online discussions focused less on results and more on usage. Why certain calls appeared in specific moments. Why protection schemes looked inconsistent week to week. Why development seemed to stall even when flashes appeared. None of it proved anything by itself. But together, it kept one uncomfortable question alive. Was the rookie season judged before it even fully played out? Then came the timing that really made people pause. Within weeks of Stefanski arriving in Atlanta, reports surfaced that the organization could explore quarterback options despite already having a young passer developing. Not after a bad season, not after a long evaluation period. Immediately. Now, teams constantly evaluate talent, that's normal. But the speed of the conversation raised eyebrows. Around the league, early off-season chatter typically revolves around roster depth or scheme installation. Rarely does replacement speculation begin before practices truly ramp up. And that's when observers started connecting situations. Not accusing, not confirming, just noticing. Because if two unrelated organizations produce similar questions around the same position group, people begin wondering whether the environment matters as much as the athlete. Meanwhile, Cleveland itself looked different. The messaging changed. Teammates spoke more openly about growth and long-term development. The tone shifted from short-term survival to future building. No dramatic statements, just a noticeable difference in atmosphere. And suddenly, the story stopped being about a single season. It became about context. But the deeper timeline makes the parallels even harder to ignore. Here, where the situation stopped feeling random. Right after Kevin Stefanski arrived in Atlanta, the organization publicly welcomed a fresh start. Standard press conference energy, optimism, new terminology, new identity. Nothing unusual, every team says the same things during a transition. But behind the usual optimism, league chatter picked up unusually fast. Instead of discussions about installing concepts or adapting schemes to the roster, the early talk circled around contingency plans. Reporters began asking front office-style questions much earlier than expected, not about improvement, but about alternatives. Around the NFL, that kind of conversation normally appears months later, after real evaluation time. And that's what caught attention. Because people remembered how the previous situation unfolded with Shedeur Sanders. Back then, the public conversation also shifted quickly from development to doubt. Instead of patience, the focus leaned toward comparison. Instead of growth, it became projection. Again, not proof of anything, just a pattern of packing. Quarterbacks usually get a runway. Even inconsistent ones receive stretches of clear support while systems stabilize around them. Coaches publicly reinforce confidence because stability helps development. When that stage feels shortened, observers notice the difference. Around Atlanta, similar language surfaced: evaluation, options, flexibility. Carefully neutral words, but noticeably cautious for a brand new partnership. Analysts began pointing out that organizations normally spend the offseason highlighting why their quarterback will succeed, not why multiple paths might exist. Meanwhile, in Cleveland, the conversation slowly flipped. Instead of debating whether a quarterback belonged, discussions moved toward how the roster could help him succeed. Subtle shift, but meaningful. The subject changed from justification to construction. That contrast sparked curiosity across fan bases. Not outrage, not accusations, curiosity. Because if one environment quickly talks about contingency, while another talks about support, it suggests confidence might depend on more than just performance metrics. Sometimes it depends on alignment, coach vision, matching player strengths. And once people started lining up dates, interviews, and early narratives, they realized something uncomfortable. The questions began before the games ever could answer them. Which leads to the most important part: how perception can quietly shape reality in professional sports. In the NFL, performance matters, but perception often arrives first. Before a quarterback throws his first pass in a new system, narratives already exist. Coaches don't just evaluate players on tape, they evaluate comfort, philosophy, and trust. And once a coaching staff forms an early belief, everything afterward tends to get filtered through that belief. That's why the situation around Penix Jr. started raising eyebrows across the league. Nobody had seen him operate in the new offense yet. No training camp reps, no preseason drives. Yet the public messaging coming out felt cautious instead of committed. Teams usually go out of their way to build confidence around a young quarterback. It protects the locker room, stabilizes media coverage, and gives the player mental freedom to grow. But here, the language stayed neutral. Neutral sounds harmless, but in football it often signals uncertainty. Players notice that, teammates notice that, even opponents notice that. Because confidence from leadership shapes how everyone prepares. When a quarterback knows the organization believes in him, he plays loose. When he senses evaluation instead of investment, he plays careful. And careful football rarely produces explosive growth. That's where comparisons quietly return to Shedeur Sanders. During his early stretch, discussion often revolved around proving he belonged rather than helping him succeed. Analysts debated readiness before the system even settled. Each performance became a verdict instead of a step in development. Now observers were seeing similar packing again, not identical circumstances, but similar tone. And tone matters. Because quarterbacks don't develop in isolation. They develop inside ecosystems. Protection schemes, play calling, locker room backing, and public messaging all combine to either accelerate growth or stall it. When those pieces align, progress looks natural. When they don't, improvement feels uphill no matter the talent level. League insiders often say the hardest situation for a young passer isn't a bad roster, it's an unclear future. If players believe the organization might pivot quickly, urgency replaces patience. Instead of mastering the system, they try to justify themselves every snap. That pressure changes decision-making. Suddenly, a checkdown feels safer than a tight window throw. Creativity shrinks, confidence tightens, and outsiders interpret hesitation as inability rather than environment. Which is why people began asking a bigger question, not about individual quarterbacks, but about coaching philosophy itself. Was this coincidence? Or was the same developmental cycle starting again, under a different jersey? Quarterback situations don't stay between a coach and a player. They spill into the entire locker room. Veterans can feel it almost immediately, not from meetings but from behavior. Who gets reassurance? Who gets corrections? Who gets patience after mistakes? Players track that instinctively because consistency from leadership builds trust across the roster. And when that consistency feels uneven, tension quietly builds. Reports around Atlanta suggested teammates were still supportive publicly, but the uncertainty created an unusual atmosphere. Nobody openly criticized anything, they rarely do, yet interviews carried careful wording instead of confident conviction. In football language, there's a difference between "he's our guy" and "he's working hard." One signals commitment, the other signals evaluation. That difference matters for Penix Jr. Young quarterbacks rely on collective belief. Receivers run routes harder when they trust the ball is coming. Linemen protect longer when they believe drives will be rewarded. Defenses play looser knowing mistakes won't instantly doom the game. But if players sense instability, effort becomes cautious instead of aggressive. And cautious teams rarely develop identity. Observers noticed a familiar echo from the previous situation involving Shedeur Sanders. Back then, teammates defended him publicly, yet the broader conversation around the team never fully aligned. Some messaging pushed patience while other messaging hinted at replacement possibilities. Two directions at once. That split creates confusion inside a roster. Because players don't just listen to speeches, they watch decisions. Snap counts, play design, situational trust. If a quarterback is treated like a long-term investment, teammates rally around growth. If he's treated like a temporary solution, the locker room subconsciously prepares for change. And preparation changes behavior. Receivers freelance less. Coaches simplify reads. Risk disappears from the offense. Instead of building chemistry, everyone waits for certainty. Atlanta hadn't reached that breaking point, but the early signals sparked debate across the league. Not outrage, recognition. Veterans and analysts began discussing how fast confidence can erode when direction isn't clear. That's why some insiders started reframing the conversation. Instead of asking whether the quarterback could succeed, they asked whether the environment would ever allow success to look stable. Because in professional football, talent determines ceilings, but belief determines how quickly a player can reach it. While questions quietly followed Atlanta, something equally noticeable happened back in Cleveland. The tone flipped. Instead of debating whether a quarterback fit the system, the conversation shifted to how the system would fit the quarterback. That sounds small, but inside the NFL it changes everything. Teams either ask players to survive a structure, or they reshape the structure so players can grow inside it. And when Todd Monken stepped into the picture, the messaging immediately leaned toward adaptation. Press conferences emphasized development timelines, communication, and collaboration. Coaches talked about building concepts around strengths rather than forcing timing around limitations. More importantly, teammates echoed the same language, not cautious optimism, but clear expectation. That's where observers revisited the rookie year of Shedeur Sanders with new perspective. Instead of evaluating every play as a verdict, analysts began separating performance from circumstance. Protection issues, play complexity, and in-game adjustments started getting discussed as shared responsibility rather than individual failure. The narrative moved from "prove you belong" to "help him succeed." Locker rooms react fast to that kind of shift. Receivers commit to routes because they know opportunities will come back around. Linemen communicate protections more aggressively because the offense has direction. Coaches call plays anticipating growth instead of avoiding mistakes. Confidence becomes contagious. And young quarterbacks benefit most from contagious confidence. It doesn't magically fix a roster, but it stabilizes development. Even fans notice the difference in interviews. Instead of guarded answers about competition, players spoke about progress. Instead of comparing quarterbacks, discussions centered on execution. Subtle change, massive impact. Because in the NFL, clarity reduces pressure. A quarterback who understands his role can focus on reads, not rumors. He processes faster, trusts throws earlier, and recovers from mistakes quicker. Growth accelerates when survival mode disappears. That contrast sparked the broader debate. Maybe the early struggles weren't just about readiness. Maybe environment dictated trajectory more than people realized. No one was declaring certainty. Football never offers that. But the comparison between two situations highlighted how coaching alignment shapes development curves. And once fans saw improvement tied to stability rather than talent alone, a new question surfaced. If confidence can transform performance this quickly, what happens over a full season with a unified plan? At first, this felt like just another team transition story. New coach here, developing quarterback there. The NFL sees dozens of those every year, but the longer both situations unfolded side by side, the more executives around the league started paying attention. Not publicly, privately. Front offices constantly study patterns, not just schemes and coverages, but relationships. Which environments accelerate growth? Which ones stall it? Teams invest millions into quarterbacks, so understanding why development works matters almost as much as talent evaluation itself. And right now, two case studies appeared at the same time. In Atlanta, uncertainty lingered around Penix Jr. before he even took meaningful reps in the new structure. In Cleveland, stability began forming around Shedeur Sanders once expectations aligned with a defined plan. Executives notice contrasts like that. Because quarterback success is rarely isolated ability, it's alignment between coaching philosophy, roster construction, and communication. When those three agree, improvement looks natural. When they clash, even talented players appear inconsistent. Agents notice too. Young quarterbacks entering the league pay attention to situations where patience exists versus places where timelines shorten quickly. Veterans considering contracts watch how organizations publicly back their starters. The perception of support influences decisions across free agency and draft preparation more than fans might expect. That's why analysts began framing this less as a single-team story and more as a developmental lesson. If one coaching approach repeatedly produces early uncertainty, teams start questioning compatibility before hearing. If another approach quickly stabilizes a young passer, organizations study what changed: terminology, play design, communication structure, or simply trust. No accusations required, just observation. Because the NFL adapts fast, once a pattern becomes visible, decision makers incorporate it into future evaluations. Coordinators adjust interview strategies. General managers reconsider fits between coaches and quarterbacks. Even college prospects start thinking about landing spots differently. And that's what makes this situation bigger than either city. It's turning into a reference point, a live example of how environment shapes trajectory, not proving any individual right or wrong, but highlighting how fragile quarterback development really is. Which leads to the biggest takeaway emerging from both sidelines. In modern football, talent might get you drafted, but alignment determines whether you actually flourish. Here's the part most fans don't realize. In the NFL, reputations change slower than performances, until suddenly they don't. For months, debates centered around individual ability. Was the quarterback ready? Was he overrated? Did he need more time? Every incomplete pass fed an argument. Every highlight fueled another. But as both situations evolved, the conversation gradually moved away from the players and towards something much harder to measure: coaching compatibility. League circles began re-evaluating earlier assumptions about Shedeur Sanders, not rewriting history, just recontextualizing it. Plays that once looked like hesitation started being viewed as pressure management. Conservative decisions started looking like survival choices inside unstable circumstances. The tape hadn't changed, the framework used to judge it had. At the same time, questions followed Kevin Stefanski into his new environment. Again, not accusations, patterns. When similar discussions appear around different quarterbacks in separate cities, evaluators naturally compare timelines. How quickly trust is communicated, how systems adjust, whether development looks collaborative or corrective. Coaches build reputations the same way players do, through repeated outcomes more than single seasons. That shift matters because reputation affects opportunity. Quarterbacks entering future drafts here, which staffs accelerate growth and which demand immediate proof. Veterans deciding where to sign consider who will tailor schemes to strengths. Even coordinators choosing jobs weigh how much control they'll have in shaping offensive identity. Meanwhile, Atlanta's situation around Penix Jr. became a measuring stick. If stability forms, concerns fade. If uncertainty continues, perception hardens. Either result teaches the league something. And that's why this story carries weight beyond wins and losses. The NFL constantly searches for competitive edges, analytics, training, recovery, but quarterback confidence might be the most fragile advantage of all. Once players believe their development path is secure, improvement accelerates. Once doubt creeps in, progress slows regardless of talent. So the discussion quietly evolved. Less about who failed, more about what environments create success. Because by the end of this season, the league won't just remember records. It will remember which approach unlocked growth and which one couldn't. When you step back, this was never just about one quarterback, one coach, or even one team. It became a comparison unfolding in real time. Two cities, two locker rooms, two completely different tones. As Atlanta continues figuring out its direction with Penix Jr., Cleveland moves forward building stability around Shedeur Sanders. And the longer both paths develop, the clearer the takeaway becomes. Quarterback success isn't created only by talent evaluation. It's shaped by belief and alignment from day one. That's why the conversation across the league has slowly changed. Instead of asking whether a young passer can handle the pressure, people are asking whether the environment allows him to grow through it. Because confidence from leadership doesn't just affect performance, it affects trajectory. And reputations follow trajectory. By the end of this season, fans won't just remember who won more games. They'll remember which situation nurtured development and which one constantly searched for answers. In a league built on adjustments, sometimes the biggest adjustment isn't scheme or personnel, it's commitment. So now the question shifts to you. Are we watching two separate stories, or one lesson playing out twice in different places? Either way, the results will speak louder than any headline.